this idea that we might be teaching humans how to unfold. Like, this isn't particularly appreciated outside even like the kindergarten classroom, right? Like there we teach people to hold hands, wash their hands, and sit on their squares. But once we get to be 12, like, we don't teach people how to be people anymore. Now we teach them stuff. We're supposed to be about teaching them stuff. And this idea that like teaching people how to be good humans changes over time, that the emergence of our good humanness ends at some point, and then we just do that thing. This is what's so exciting for me about the global inner goals, is because it says, hey, there is this whole other game that we've been missing. And this game, if we were to pay attention to it, it could change everything between us. And we don't need more resources. We don't need more anything. We just need to shift our gaze a little and shift our conversations a little, and suddenly an entirely new set of possibilities opens up to us. So I feel super excited about what that makes available for us and for the future.
Now, we've had this view for a long time that once our kind of bodies grew up, our minds kind of were fixed and the neural pathways were set in place, and all we could do is add more information. But sciences like neuroplasticity has helped us see that change is possible, that we can grow and develop.
The core idea of cognitive neuroscience is that you think that you're in control of your behavior, but you're wrong.
So it's a kind of a strange territory in a way, because at one level, we know this materialization of progress is kind of crazy. We all know this, and yet we worship it. And around the world, many of our societies, they are gripped by fear. And the fear, in my opinion, is mostly an expression of the fear of loss, of what we think we have, this reaching back to grasp onto something before it's gone. We're not even sure what the something is.
If we have a story of humanity and a perspective around ourselves that is that we are rational, then knowledge is obviously the way to go. All you need to do a mind shift is to get the knowledge of how to shift minds or why development is important, and then you'll actually become more developed. There's a one-to-one correlation in between those. And I have bad news. That's not true at all.
Let's think about development, adult development, with the two dimensions, or around the two dimensions that Tomas and Lena laid out in the Nordic Secret of, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, but self-awareness and accountability. And then we have to think about how groups can help self-awareness and accountability. Jennifer talked about self-awareness as the very core of adult development, and I couldn't agree more. And accountability is about that willingness to take on a larger responsibility, not just for yourself and your own impact, but for a larger and larger sphere of human activity. So I sometimes say that the fundamental human challenge, and I mean it, is this: it's hard to learn if you already know. And unfortunately, for better or worse, we're hardwired to have the experience of knowing. We look around and we believe fully, wholeheartedly, that we're seeing reality.
I think the thing that we're pointing to is a radical transformation of what it means to be human together, right? I think that this is the question that faces us as a collective.
I think wisdom is more like a process of wise acts. And I know somebody who did research saying, oh, it looks like wisdom is similar to these late stage things, but actually there's something different. There's something that distinguishes wisdom, and it has a lot to do with contextual relevance.
We have an extremely low understanding, a really depressed understanding of what it means to be a human being and what human development means. There's a wonderful story about Gandhi, one of his many visits to London, and he's asked by a British journalist, Mr. Gandhi, What's your view of Western civilization? And his response, according to the story, was, it would be a very good idea. So the idea that civilization exists on a purely technical level, it can be measured by GDP, it can be measured by all the ways we orient and define progress in our modern societies, is kind of a crazy idea.
Everyone talks about radical innovation. What's really happening? Optimizing the past, optimizing the status quo, kind of reinvent, so marginal improvement of what we have, and a lack of really letting go of these old systems and radically reimagining and reshaping the systems that we collectively enact.
That we, back then, in the end of the 1800s, had some very visionary intellectuals and politicians who knew that in times of rapid societal transition, it is just so easy for us humans to want to have an external authority to hold on to. We might want to have a dogmatic religion or authoritarian leader to hold on to, an Erdogan or a Trump. But these intellectuals and politicians, they did not want to be those authoritarian leaders. They were firmly committed to building strong democracies. And they knew that the only way to build strong democracies is to build them from bottom up. In particular, they had an understanding, an extraordinary understanding of human development. And they knew, just like we heard this morning, some of us from Jonathan Reams, that one of these very important steps in our adult development is to get away from the need of this outside authority for our values and for our recognition, and really internalize this locus of control, to, in a much deeper sense, become authors of our own lives, or in Professor Keegan's word, to become self-authoring.
And so we could say that early on, we have what is called advanced linear thinking. And we see it as being relatively simplistic. And what is in focus in people's attention and awareness are individuals with personalities, skills, attitudes, habits, points of view. This is very much a kind of if-then thinking. You get a lot of polarities involved in this, black and white type of thinking. Eventually, different challenges, support systems, contexts. Katharina Berg spoke about learning is everything. This attitude towards learning can enable us to move into an early systems thinking. And these are structures of the way in which we organize the thinking tools we have. And this is now complex. And what becomes in focus are integrated groups of individuals with different roles and relationships. So we can work in a team and understand team dynamics is important. The what's between us has its own kind of sense of being an entity, if you will. Eventually, we can move on to more advanced systems thinking as we encounter more highly complex challenges that demand that we can integrate multiple groups that are interacting with dynamic organizational systems. And eventually, we've often heard the phrase of the simplicity on the other side of complexity. We have a category called early principles thinking, which is elegantly simple. And what comes into focus is multiple dynamic organizational systems that form marketplaces, economies, societies, and such.
How this integral theory and how important it is to bring together different perspectives. Well, different perspectives come from these different stages, and it's important to address them and integrate them. And there is a value in all of them, and there are blind spots in all of them. And I think that's very important to remember. And that the role is not to as I mentioned at the end, not going out saying, now we want to change mindsets. I think it's just the opposite. We should look back to ourselves and see it as a tool to understand how we engage ourselves with others and make sure that we can involve everybody and support each other towards sustainability or whatever the context specific will be.
The growth culture is obviously the upper right-hand quadrant, where we're high both in care and support that makes the place safe enough that I can actually risk showing you who I fully am, showing you my strengths and exercising those capabilities, but actually being able to show you my limitations and not feel any less respected or any less included, like actually cheered for. You know, the whole entrepreneurial mantra, fail fast, fail frequently, fail forward. Imagine if we brought that mantra to the way we think about people development, that I'm saluted for failing and failing quickly. And then you build supports around me to help me grow beyond that limitation. Now we're talking about playing a whole different kind of game. The lower left-hand business as usual tends to promote the kinds of disengagement that many people and researchers have already documented. The niceness culture, it feels comfortable, but from a developmental point of view, it's stagnant. The tough guy culture promotes defensiveness. It's the growth culture that promotes development.
We are not looking for clones, that it's okay not to have an okay day. It's okay to have all the things that we all carry around as individuals, as human beings, right? We're not looking for Übermensch. Yes, most people, honestly, that work in the company are super smart, but we all, have the challenges. We've been talking about mental fitness or mental health, or maybe also not so healthy or fit. Very, very important to acknowledge that and talk about it and be open and transparent. And in that, you also create a safety, right? That it's okay not to be okay, and still be a very big part of the success or the journey that we are on.
But the features of these long-lived companies always became a touchstone for us. First, those that lived for centuries had a deep sense of who they were. They called it identity, who we are that transcends what we do. Because if you think about it, to evolve continually as a business, what anchors you? Well, you have to have a sense of identity that goes beyond what you do. If who you are is what you do, it's very hard to let go of what you do. Secondly, they had a sense of connection to their larger world. They had a sense of social responsibility. I think that's literally the term they used in the original Shell study. Before, social responsibility was a jargon term. They had a spirit of fiscal conservatism. In other words, they didn't want to become too dependent on external sources of capital because it would limit their ability to continually explore and experiment. They wanted to be in control of their own destiny. And of course, that was the fourth characteristic, this openness. They had a great phrase. I remember in the original, I read an internal version of this study before it was ever published. And they considered it super confidential. They didn't actually publish the results of this until 15 years after the original study. They called it the capacity to run experiments in the margin. I always thought that was a great phrase, experiments in the margin. This kind of willingness to try crazy new ideas, not necessarily in the mainstream of your business, but in the margins of your business, which means that basically another way to say that is you really accept that a lot of the leadership must come from the periphery.
And the leadership question here is, can you listen with humility? Can you listen from outside of your own bubble? Building architectures of connection, that's ultimately the response to the post-democracy, the polarization that we see. Can you co-sense your system from the edges, kind of through the eyes of the people and stakeholders that are most marginalized? In your own community, in your own ecosystem. And lastly, kind of on the post-humanity and kind of the amplification of anxiety, depression, and fear, can we activate our action confidence, by which I mean the capacity to sense and actualize emerging future possibilities? So those are, I think, the three questions that we have to ask ourselves, and they have like a micro version, right, for myself. Then they have a meso version of how do I build these infrastructures, right, that support these practices in the context of my own organization, in the context of my own area of responsibility. But they also have a macro version as it applies to society.
Was it Dag Hammarskjöld that said that, and he's been all over the world, right, as a peace negotiator and heading the United Nations, and he always said that the biggest journey or the biggest travel I done is from here down to here. So the inner journey, and if I can send a message, is that that journey, I think, never ends, and there is a journey that needs to happen.
That vertical development is not just about kind of advancing to some higher stage, but recognizing that the process of development itself always involves the dread and the experience of loss, of leaving behind a familiar, identified with, cherished way of knowing oneself, the world, and one's relationship to it. And that we have to be attending as much to supporting people in the experience of what may feel to them at the moment like an impermissible kind of loss, to make developments like from the tribalism of the socialized mind to this self-authorship that we're talking about, that it can be a very, very difficult move to make. And we're not going to succeed kind of with Otto's idea of being able to, you know, sense each other's world and work across kind of these bubbles without also extending a kind of sympathy and compassion for the labors and losses of development.
I just say, I don't think it's them, right? I think it's us too. I think there is loss that we have to be willing. Like we Jennifer talked about the more, and that might not be just stuff, right? It's the length of your vita, right? It's the, I mean, we're all a little guilty, and it is a question of what do I need to let go of to get what we want, really deeply, truly want, and might be able to create.